What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with a Monday night edition of You Got Boston, Celtics off day, which means we can go and do one of these Q&As. I got about 45 minutes to maybe even an hour, so we can answer as many questions as you all have. And I tried something different. I feel like I used Twitter quite a bit. I've tried Blue Sky a bit, but I actually posted on Reddit today for questions, and I got a lot of really good questions. So I'm going to go through some of those Reddit questions as well. About the team, about covering the team. It honestly hasn't been like the most eventful, stretch of the season. I think just because they haven't played the best teams yet. So I'm happy to also talk about the process of covering the Celtics if that's interesting to people. Got a lot of questions about that on the Reddit thread. So thanks to those of you who submitted, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat as I kind of talk through things. Obviously, the Celtics are 21-5. I think this is their third consecutive year starting with that record, which is pretty remarkable. And then not to mention the fact that, coming off a championship, I think there was a lot of speculation about whether there would be a championship hangover. And this team, I don't think has really faced that championship hangover. I'm looking forward to seeing them in a more difficult stretch of the schedule. But so far, I think you've seen a team that is performing to expectations. And as you guys that have been following the team know, I think Pritchard has been the biggest storyline as far as what's been different about last year's team to this year's team is just his kind of evolution and everything. So as we kind of go through the show, feel free if you have things you want to hear about, talk about, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to go through chat box questions, but I have on the other tab here a Reddit thread that I posted, which I can just post here if people just want to see, but I just posted this on Reddit where I just asked people for questions. So I want to make sure that I can get through all those questions as well. And then obviously I titled this The Secret to the Celtics 21-5 start. So I will share what I think the secret is to their success so far this season. That's even a little bit different than years past as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that during this show as well. And yeah, I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Obviously, Celtics were off today after playing in DC yesterday and beating the Wizards. I wasn't on the ground in DC this time. I was last time when they were there for the White House. But I'm going to be on pretty much all the road games for the next 2 months. So I'm hitting the road. I'm going to be at OKC, Houston, Oklahoma, OKC, Houston. What else is there in that stretch? Denver, San Francisco, the Warriors, Lakers, all that. So there are a lot of different trips coming, games coming up, and I think a more difficult schedule. And I'm excited to be on the ground, and I'll be doing these live shows from my hotel in different places as well. So feel free to subscribe to You Got Boston. My point is I know there's a lot of great Celtics podcasts out there. I go on some of them sometimes. Obviously, we have the post-game show, the Garden Report that I'm a part of. So the point of this is to just be able to answer your guys' questions. I always think about when I was a fan and I just wanted to know everything there was to know about the NBA and about basketball and about the team. I just wanted to ask the questions. So this is kind of an opportunity to answer those. So I'm going to start with the chat here, and then I'm going to go through Reddit as well. And I'm seeing a lot of questions about the same person, and I'm not surprised. This has been a big topic for the last year now, but how long is KP going to be out? I see some Christopher here asks, I have a question for Kristaps Porzingis' injury. I'm not surprised that it's going to be a very popular question. So this is what I'll say about Porzingis. I think Porzingis, this particular injury is not a huge deal based off of what he said, based off of the fact that he was questionable to return. I always point to that. Teams are very quick to say doubtful to return, out for the game. Questionable means that it's a more of a pain tolerance thing. Obviously, against the Wizards in December, you're not going to have somebody that is already very injury prone come back. So when I saw that he was out for the game, he was not going to come back regardless of how he was feeling. That's pretty obvious. But the fact that he was questionable is a good sign about that particular injury. So that being said, I don't necessarily have concern about that. I do have concern about Porzingis in general. I'm a huge Porzingis fan. I think he's been so impactful for this team. Couldn't have been a more perfect fit in the locker room, on the court. But at the same time, he has not been able to stay healthy for an extended period of time. And I actually think last season he was as healthy as we've seen him for a while. And then obviously the soleus strain in the playoffs, and then coming back and then tearing his ankle on the other leg, needing off-season surgery, and then coming back this year. He really hasn't played very much, but already had an ankle thing, had this heel pain. So I do have a little bit of concern about just his availability in general. And sometimes when I see guys that just have his build, it's like, I don't think it's a work ethic thing. I don't think it's a medical staff thing. I think it's just when you're a unicorn, which is, what we always call him, like that also comes with the fact that it can be hard to stay available. So it's probably my biggest concern about this team in general. If you ask, nobody really asked that question, but if the question is like, what is your biggest concern about the Celtics? It is Porzingis' health and availability. And the question is, can he be, can they win the championship again without him? And I felt really confident last season that every series that they entered, I said to myself, if he's not available, I think they can still win the series. And I think they will still win the series. And I'm on the record for saying that. So I do believe that has been, I always felt that way. And so this is my continued belief. I still have a lot of faith in this team without him, but that's my only concern is like, I would game plan if I'm the Celtics, I'm Joe Mazzulla, if I'm Brad Stevens, I'm game planning for the playoffs without Porzingis just in case. And then if he's available to play, he's going to be a huge boost. He's going to make everything more difficult to stop. But yeah, so that's my take. I don't want to talk about it too much because I think there's a lot of positive, more fun things to talk about than just Porzingis' injury. But we shall see. And Rui, this is very insightful. I pretty much don't ever name Porzingis' injury because when it first happened, I was trying to pronounce it, and I literally mispronounced it every single time. So please, yeah, I do try to avoid saying it. So, and thank you also, Rui. Yeah, please smash the like button. You can be watching this. There's 3 different channels where this is currently playing. So whichever one you're watching it on, feel free to like and subscribe as well. So that is the Porzingis update. I'm actually going to go to Reddit to go through some of the most popular fan questions. And this was just a fun way because people were able to submit questions on the Celtics subreddit. And then I was able to go through those questions and see which ones had the most upvotes and then answer those. Because sometimes I know I just have the same kind of community on Twitter, but I know a lot of people don't like Twitter, which I totally understand. I have plenty of concerns with Twitter. So this is an opportunity to just kind of go into a different crowd. So I'll still go through the chat questions, but I wanted to do some Reddit questions as well. So first question that I got here is, what are some surprising things about some of the players that the fans don't know? And I think the fans actually do know like a lot because I think everything that we know, we try to report out to kind of give the team more color, give the players more color. But the one thing I will say that's kind of obvious, but like their personalities when they're sitting at the podium and talking to us with the camera, when we have cameras in their faces, are not always their like actual personalities. And I see that because I see sometimes people saying like, this guy's really boring. Chances are he's not boring. Chances are he's really media trained and he knows how to not say the wrong thing. So that's the biggest thing that has surprised me. Or I guess didn't really surprise me, but I feel like it's a misconception. Like people say Tatum's really boring. I see Tatum cracking up at practice all the time, going up to people, like pranking them. Like he's goofy. He's not like this really serious, no nonsense guy. But when he's sitting up at the podium, he's not going to stray away from that persona because that's just the way that he has decided that it's going to be his image when he's up there. He's not going to, he's not going to push the boundaries of like what you can say. He's just going to say the most like surefire things. So I think just if you're wondering like, wow, this guy seems to always be like this, some of it is true. Like he is, and I'm using Tatum as an example, but he is somebody that is pretty well known for not being hot and cold, not being up and down. But I also think there's an element of like the media training that I think maybe some people underestimate. And I don't underestimate it because my job is to like try to get them to say something interesting, despite the fact that they're also media trained, and not to get them in trouble, but to get them just more comfortable and that sort of thing. So, and also just like the more famous you are and the more high profile you are as a superstar, the more likely you're going to be wanting to be really careful with what you're saying. So yeah, so Neil, yeah, I agree with that. I think he is kind of like the ultimate professional. So with that being said, the other question that I got on Reddit that had a bunch of upvotes is, who is the funniest guy in the team except for Luke Cornett? Luke is definitely the funniest. Actually, in the finals last year, the finals was like the easiest time to cover the team because there were daily availabilities where all of the players were on the court and you could just go up to people and ask them questions, which is not the case for regular practices or games. Like normally you have this guy is talking today or this guy is available for post game, but otherwise you can't just go up to like a random person and start asking them questions. But during the finals you could. So I asked every single player in the team who was the funniest guy in the team, and every single player said Luke Cornett. So this person on Reddit asked who is the funniest guy in the team except for Luke Cornett. So I won't go with him. I personally find Jordan Walsh really funny. He's just very comfortable with the media, like with me and other people that cover him. So he's like cracked me up a bunch. I think as somebody else who's funny to their teammates, actually Derek White. He got a few second place votes. But, humor is a subjective thing. But Luke is definitely like, I see him just doing comedy routines, honestly, pregame. And when he goes up to the podium, I never even know when he's answering a question seriously or when he's trolling or all that. So yeah, that is the answer to that question. And then a question here, someone else asked, I see there were a lot of interest in interpersonal things, which is actually like my favorite topic to cover, honestly. So maybe that's more of a Reddit thing, but someone asked, who is Drew's best friend on the team? My 7-year-old daughter is a huge Drew fan and wants to know. It's hard to ascertain these things always. I think you can start to see like, okay, these two guys are pretty close, or like I can say that like Luke and Sam are pretty close. I can say that Peyton and Jalen are pretty close. Jalen and Porzingis. So like there's certain pairings that start to become pretty obvious. With Drew, actually, I think he's pretty close with Tillman. I think their kids are friends, and also they both joined the team last year. So there's a little bit of camaraderie there. I also think that him and Derek have a friendship, like just being in the backcourt, being in the Olympics together. So it seems like he's not somebody that's like stood out to me where he's like always with this one guy. But yeah, those are the names that came to mind when I first saw that question. So, and then I'm going to do, someone asked who is the nicest Celtic on the team. That question is also, again, it's going to be my impression of it, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's who is the nicest, like as a person, right? Like I don't actually know that. But as far as like friendliness to the media, it's always going to be like the less famous people. Like that's just the reality of it, because they don't have to worry about like if I say something that's like not what I meant to say and it gets posted and it's on SportsCenter, like now all of a sudden Stephen A. Smith is talking about it. So it's going to make you a little bit more uptight. I think somebody who's been super nice is like Jordan Walsh, Drew Peterson, Baylor Shireman. Like when I go up to Maine and talk to those guys, like they're so down to earth, they're so friendly, because in Maine, you're not going to make headlines. Like I don't want to diminish that's the only reason, but that is a big factor as well. Jaylen Brown's honestly really, really nice. Like I think last year when I started in the fall, like I'd never covered a professional basketball team before. So it's always a little nerve-wracking to like figure out, what kinds of questions are okay to ask and what questions like aren't okay, and timing and like after losses and wins. Like there's a lot of psychology that goes into all that. And then, I think for me, like this is, those guys, the young guys all stood out, but also Jaylen Brown was very friendly from the beginning. And that stood out to me as well, because I was like, I didn't really know what to expect. I know he's kind of like has this tough exterior, but I feel like you ask a question that is like not completely intended to be asked. Like in media day, he got asked about the USA team and he started laughing and was like, that's the first question I'm going to get. So he actually has this like kind of friendly banter with the media sometimes. So he's been super nice as well. Obviously Derek's been really nice. It's honestly a pretty nice team. Like I haven't really seen any like hostile interactions between the media and the players. I haven't seen the players like go at one another. So I don't want to be like boring here, but that's kind of the reality of it. And then someone else here asked, with as much as you are all around the team, are there a lot of off-the-record conversations where you get to know each other, or is it all business? So I would say everything is off the record unless it's specifically a media availability. So if I ask an assistant coach, like, oh, by the way, like there was a timeout yesterday. Like when I was at Summer League, I talked a bunch with Matt Reynolds, who does the timeouts, and I was asking him questions about like how he goes about timeouts, how he goes about like certain decisions that he makes on the floor, like what each assistant's role is. Everything that I learned from those conversations is off the record, unless specifically I was like, can this be on the record? But that's the understanding. So the most you can do, like the more you talk to people, like the better. You can learn a lot about the team, you can form relationships, but you can't report on those things. So definitely there's a lot of off the record times. I think the most was at Summer League because there's not like that much going on. Everybody's just kind of there to hang out. During the playoffs on the road, everybody's guard is a little bit down on the road because we have a huge media beat in Boston. There's like, I don't want to say like maybe 30 reporters sometimes at home games. And then on the road, it'll be like 5. So it's just disarming. Like you can chat with somebody on the sidelines or whatever. So certainly on the road, I think there's more camaraderie. And then Joe will sometimes chat with us off the record as well. So like after media availability, like once all of our cameras are down, maybe he'll say, he'll kind of continue talking to us, and that's all off the record. So I really like those opportunities. I honestly wish we did more of them because I think it's just good for like the player media relationship, the coach media relationship. But then sometimes I want to like refer back to things that were said, and I'm like, oh, that is all off the record. Like I have to make sure I don't ever like, paraphrase any of that. Like that's all off the record. So, those are some Reddit questions. I want to move back from Reddit back to here just to make sure I can get people's questions in the chat as well. I know those aren't really like about the Celtics themselves, but I know people sometimes have questions about just like covering the team and what that process is like. And I'm always happy to talk about that. I try not to make that like the focus of this podcast because at the end of the day, like you guys are here to hear about the Celtics, but it can just be just another way to get a perspective. So let me just look. I see here Tom asked, do I think Pritchard can keep the efficiency up? I think there will be some regression, just like my thing with guys and their shooting, and we can talk more about this, but I think in general, if you're looking at a guy's three-point shooting and they're at 45% this year, but they're at 40% for the last 5 years, like it's probably going to go down close to 40%. Whereas if they're at 45% this year and that's been their average for the last 5 years, like you can look at that bigger picture and kind of figure things out. So Pritchard is at like, I think 43% this season. But when you look at his last few years, he's around 40%. So it's not like he's so above his normal shooting that it's going to go down. Drew Holiday last year was like quite substantially above his average three-point shooting. And so if you'd asked me, like, is his shooting going to go back down a little bit this season? Like, I mean, I was asked that question and the answer was yes. And now we're seeing that, I think it's a little bit more drastic than maybe I expected, but I'm a big believer in looking at the big picture with guys shooting splits rather than like the last 10 games or this game or the last month even, or even the last like 3 months. And because, we have a whole body of work to go off of. That's why somebody like Sam Hauser, I've said this from the first day that he started shooting poorly this season. He's never shot below 40% this in his entire career. I don't expect him to do that this year either. So even though he started the year really slow, he's already shooting like 45% from three in the last 10 games. So he's going to go back up. He'll probably hit that 40% number because he literally always has. So that's my philosophy on like regression to the mean, and efficiency is just like looking at their career body of work. With the young guys, it's hard. Like someone like Jordan Walsh, it's hard because I don't have years of shooting to look at. But with all these older players, like that is always my philosophy and always my belief. So yeah, that's my perspective on that. And yes, thank you, Landon, for the push. And I totally agree with this, Tom. I think this is you probably wrote this when I was talking about Jalen being really nice. Yeah, he seems way more relaxed this year. And also just like when he takes 5 shots and a half, he seems really relaxed about that reality as well. Like I don't think he's uptight about like getting his points or anything because I feel like he feels like he proved himself and kind of I mean, I think that Finals MVP is the highest individual accolade that one could win, even more so than MVP. That's my opinion. I know some people feel otherwise, but so to me, it's like he's proven himself quite a bit. I love this question from Neil. So I get this, one of the things that's interesting about covering the Celtics and just covering basketball in general, because I also cover the WNBA, and in that role, I'm in a very different spot because I cover the entire league. So it's like people are reading your work from all the different fan bases. But one of the things that it's been really interesting to me is that people are very defensive of their favorite players. And I don't really understand it completely because I've always had like favorite players when I was a kid growing up, like being a diehard fan. I don't really know that I cared that much if like a certain media member didn't believe in my player. Like I'm trying to put myself in those shoes from like, I don't know, like 7 years ago when I was watching, listening to podcasts and like heard, national media or local media criticize somebody that I really believed in. Like, I don't know that it really bothered me. So it's something that I have to like kind of understand that maybe other people are operating differently than me. But an example of this is like, I was asked, I was doing a stand-up segment with Bobby Manning after a game. And I said that I think Tatum at this point is probably better than Giannis. Like I said it in that tone. I'm actually not even sure if that's true. I've thought about this. Like, I do think he's more well-rounded, but Giannis is just so dominant and consistent. So like, I've been going back and forth in my own mind about what I think about that. But so many Bucks fans, like, I mean, thousands were sending me hate messages and just the nastiest things, blowing up my Twitter DMs, finding my email, like just going to such an extent to be like so mad that I criticized Giannis, where I love Giannis. Like I love watching Giannis play. I think he's a phenomenal player. I think he's deserved his MVPs that he's gotten. I think he's one of the best players in the league right now. But because in that moment I said, I think Tatum is a better all-around player than Giannis, like that really, really upset people. And I don't really know why, because if I'm a Bucks fan, like, what do I care what some reporter in Boston said in a stand-up with her co-host? But that was people's reaction. So I've tried to just tell myself, like, this is my job. Like, I have to share my opinion. there's never going to be an opinion that everybody's happy with. If I had said I think Giannis will be better than Tatum, then probably the Celtics fans would have been like, I don't like that. Or maybe people would have agreed with me. I don't know. But you can't like say your opinion just worried about what people are going to think about you. I try to be mindful. Like certainly I'm careful about my words more so than I am just like talking to my friends. But it is kind of a weird dynamic to have to balance like the knowing that everything you say lives online forever. And then all of a sudden, one person quote tweets it that has a huge following. And now all of a sudden you're like subject to so much hate for like an extended period of time for saying something that's like just kind of lukewarm. Like I think this guy's better than this guy or whatnot, or I'm not a huge believer in this prospect. It doesn't mean that like I'm right. It doesn't mean that this guy's the worst. I very rarely, I never really say anything just like hateful about any of these players, like, cause they're all people. And like, we're talking about basketball. Right. So it is kind of a weird dynamic, but I've just learned to try to get a little bit of a thicker skin, and it's a work in progress. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is a little much. Like I'm just trying to write about basketball. Why are people so mad? But I try to remind myself that it's kind of everybody, if you look at any media person, like that's kind of just part of the game. So yeah, that's my answer on that. I'm going to continue kind of scrolling through here. And yeah, I appreciate everybody that's tuning in. It's been so fun, honestly, just being a part of this CLNS community and then having this podcast. So whether you know me from my podcast, which you can subscribe to on YouTube, or from the postgame show, I appreciate you coming in and asking questions. And I want to try to do this like at least weekly. It depends sometimes on the schedule, but weekly for sure. Leo here asked about Tillman. So Tillman's actually someone I totally forgot about when I was asked who is the nicest Celtic on the team from that Reddit comment. And honestly, Tillman's probably up there. Like he is so friendly. And I talked to him a bunch in the finals last year. And that was one of my favorite parts about the finals, was covering like his journey and his contributions on the team. So, and that 3-point shot was my favorite shot from probably the whole playoffs. So Tillman's great as a person. He's really struggled this season. I think everybody that's watched this team closely and has watched his minutes has been able to see that. And I don't know that he's going to be in the rotation, even if Porzingis is hurt. Something that I learned about Joe Mazzulla is he's never going to play a guy just because he has to. Like he will find a way to not if he doesn't feel completely confident in that person. Like Jaden Springer, I don't think really has the staff's full trust right now. I don't want to speak out of turn. Like nobody said that, but my understanding is that, if a guy's on the floor, that means the coaching staff trusts them. Luke and Nimi both have trust of the coaching staff. They've played in considerable amounts. I think Xavier Tillman right now, like he's passing up open shots when he's out there. He doesn't seem very comfortable offensively, to a point where it is kind of a liability for them. And so I would be surprised if in the short term he gets minutes, but he's going to get another opportunity this season. And then that's going to be a chance for him to either show that he is ready for a rotational role, or he's going to get another opportunity and it's not going to work out. And we've seen that as well. So yeah, we've seen kind of both fronts. Like when he's gotten extended minutes, like in the playoffs, I thought he lived up to it quite well. And then earlier this season, he had like that one start, a couple of stretches where it really didn't pan out well. So right now, I think he's kind of a little bit, I don't want to say in the doghouse, but he's not in the mix. And I think we're just going to see more from Luke, more from Kata, maybe more lineups where maybe Tatum's even at the 5, like smaller lineups. I don't know, but I would be surprised if Tillman gets extended run, just because it seems like right now there have been opportunities. Even when the whole stretch where Porzingis was out, he really didn't, he didn't get much of an opportunity there. So I'm rooting for him. I think he's a hard worker. I think he's somebody he's just been such a joy to cover. But right now, he's obviously, him and Jaden are the two guys that are, and it was funny, they're both the mid-season acquisitions from last season. So maybe like less time has hurt them, but they've not been able to kind of find their footing with this team as much. So yeah, that's my thought right now. And just a quick message, we're going to go back to some of these soon, but just wanted to go over to our friends over from PrizePicks.
PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. You can pick anything that you think is likely to happen. So I would pick Peyton Pritchard, certain number of threes, whatever it is, pretty safe, assurance at this point that he is going to hit that. Anything that you feel has been a pretty consistent pattern, those are the types of trends that you can capitalize on PrizePicks. You can make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. Join now, because this holiday season, PrizePicks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
Awesome. So I've been reading some of these messages. It's fun. Yeah, it's fun to see these questions. I love talking about covering the team. It's like I could probably do it for like 5 hours every day, not get sick of it. So I'm biased towards answering those questions, but I want to make sure I get through all the basketball questions as well here. But okay, so people are weighing in on the Tatum and Giannis stuff. See, that's the thing. I thought it was like they're close. I don't think it's too far off. It doesn't need to be like a national controversy. But there's not a lot of nuance online. I used to tweet so much, like just random takes that I have. Now every time I tweet something, I'm scared that it's going to be a controversy because someone's going to take it the wrong way or, whatever. So yeah, it's all part of the learning process. And this is a great question from Eric. Honestly, like, how does it feel covering the sport you love and being paid for it? I promise myself every day that I'm not going to take it for granted, that I'm not going to get sick of it. It has truly been like the best part of my life. It has been so much fun. And I didn't really get paid for it last year. I don't know if people realize that, but I was like basically unpaid. Like I had a full-time job that was lobbying and I was just doing it on the side, like trying to make it my job. So now that it's like when I get my paycheck, I'm like, oh, this is like straight up for covering the Celtics and covering basketball. Like that's pretty crazy. So it has been awesome. I think the awestruck moments were in the finals last year, just being there, like being at TD Garden when the confetti fell and then being in the post-game press conference room, like asking Derek White a question like moments later. Because I've just grown up. I was always like a press conference enthusiast. Like I loved watching post-game press conferences, which is not like that normal of a basketball take, but I would watch the game and then I would say, okay, I'm going to watch the post-game pressers. And even like I sometimes will just watch like other teams' post-game pressers just to see what kinds of questions are being asked, what players are saying. So being in those rooms has been pretty crazy. And then just like realizing when it becomes normal, like just being like, oh, I'm going to practice today. And it's like, oh no, I'm going to watch Celtics practice. Like that's crazy. Like if I had one chance to do that 5 years ago, I would have been like, this is the coolest day ever. Now I get to do it all the time. So I don't take it for granted. I think if you start to take it for granted, then it starts to be actually a miserable job because you're working insane hours. You're at TD Garden like 3 nights a week till 2 a.m. So if it feels like work, it's like, just do something else because other people would love that job. So that's my philosophy is like, if I ever start to feel like if I don't feel awestruck by it anymore, like I probably just won't do it because I think that's the whole point of it. But yeah, it has been pretty awesome. Okay, I'm going to answer this question that Jason asked because this actually answers the headline to the secret to the Celtics 21-5 start. So Jason here asks, I'd like to get your thoughts on the overall dynamic within the team. I feel like other teams aren't playing as one unit. So this is actually exactly why I entitled this YouTube video, The Secret to the Celtics 21-5 Start. So this team is incredibly unselfish. And I am almost like embarrassed to admit this, but I cover this team every day. I have a very positive outlook about this team. I think everybody that knows me knows that. And even so, I'm not sitting here watching this team on a daily basis and being like, wow, they are so unselfish, or I wasn't. And then I started thinking about what coaches were saying pregame. So before every game, we go to TD Garden like a few hours early. I watch the, stay ready guys go through their warm-ups. You can chat with some of the assistants. That's when sometimes I'll post clips of like Jordan Walsh getting up shots or like Springer or whatever it is. And then we go hear from Joe Mazzulla and then we hear from the away coach. And it's really like the only time each day where you can listen to the coach of the opposing team and like actually just ask them about your team that you're covering. And every coach that goes into TD Garden and sits there pregame is like, this team is so unselfish. They move the ball so well. And believe it or not, it's really rare. And JV Bickerstaff, the coach of the Pistons, who also knows the Celtics really well because he coached the Cavs last year and prepped against them for the playoffs, he said like, this team is so unselfish. And I actually asked him, I was like, what do you mean by that? Because everybody's saying it. And I'm just trying to understand, like, why is it that you're going and watching this team and you're preparing for them? And this is what stands out. Not like this team is so talented. It's like, that's actually what they're getting hung up on. And he said, you would be surprised how unusual it is to just pass to the open person at this level. Like, that's the reality of it, is that it's actually really unusual to just be normally, like, as a unit, have faith in everybody on the floor. And so after he said that, I kind of went back and started watching the games through that lens. And I asked a bunch of the players about it. And I realized that's really the story of this team. And sometimes we get caught up in like, there's so many stars on this team. There's, Tatum and Brown and Porzingis, and then the backcourt is all defense, and Pritchard's been a revelation and all these other things. But really, I think the story of this team is that they play as one unit regardless of which 5 guys are out there. It doesn't matter if it's Drew Peterson in the corner, like he is going to get that pass. And that is actually not the case for most NBA teams. And I think maybe that's part of the frustration that fans have watching this, the Celtics play. Sorry, watching other NBA teams play, is they're like, I'm not really enjoying this experience that much because I'm feeling like I'm watching a lot of like iso ball, or I'm watching guys that are playing really selfishly, and covering this team, like that's just really not the case. So I wrote a whole story about it. If you want to know more, you are welcome to. I just put a link in the chat. I wrote it for SB Nation, which is where I write full time. And Eric Spoelstra, Doc Rivers, all these guys have really praised the Celtics team. And these are people that have been around the Celtics for the last, many years. And this has not always been the case. So I think it's something that there's a confluence of factors. People have their contracts locked up. Certainly winning a championship helps. There's a certain level of buy-in and like kind of affirmation that what you did last year worked. And then also there's the understanding that like you actually have a group of guys that are willing to play for and with each other. So yeah, it's pretty fun. I love basketball. That's why I do this. And like getting to watch people play together like this, it's kind of like how the game is supposed to be played, right? So nobody wants to watch guys like look each other off or not pass the open player. Like that's kind of the whole point. So, so that is, my take on that. You can check out that article if you want to read more about that's the secret, I think, to the Celtics 21-5 start is, you have a bunch of guys that have put their ego in the right place. Mazzulla, actually, I asked him about Bickerstaff's comments, and he made sure to say, it's not that we don't have egos. We just put the egos in the right place. So you can read more about that. I just put a link to that in the chat. And this is a funny comment. It kind of ties into it a little. Some people are saying, I think some fans are saying the season is boring now that we won. I disagree. But for those who are bored, what storylines or aspects of the team intrigued you the most this season? My answer to this is going to be, I actually do want to touch on this a little because I see this a lot online. I think people need to just embrace like having a good time and just relaxing and watching the sport that they supposedly love, right? And this is bigger than basketball. You could say this about your life, like, oh, I just have everything. Like I have like my friends, my family, my relationships, my job. I just have it all. Like, why am I bored? And like I think it's actually that's a big commentary on like our society. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but try to push back if you're feeling that way, because I think you're watching an all-time great team. Like I had opportunities to stop covering the Celtics and cover like the NBA at large this season. And I really didn't want to do that because I was like, I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time covering an all-time great basketball team. And I don't want to walk away from it as a reporter and look back in 20 years and say, hey, I was covering in like the 2024 Celtics. And then I took a job to cover the whole league, and I could have done that at any other point in my life. So my point is if you're a Celtics fan right now, don't take it for granted. Don't lean into that feeling of like, I'm bored. Because if you turn on TV, like chances are you can watch a really good basketball game and you can root, guys that are really easy to root for. It doesn't mean you have to care about every single game. I think like some games are more boring, and like even I find some of the games boring. But the reality is that, this is the nature of the NBA, and however many years you'll be watching a rebuilding team, and you'll probably look back and be like, oh, I probably should have appreciated this time a little bit more. To be less stressed out is a good thing, though. I see some fans last year. Fans were so dramatic after losses, and this year I'm seeing those same fans are like cool and collected. So I think there's a good side of it as well. But I think just trying to just push back on this feeling that it's not exciting. As far as what storylines are the most intriguing, I find Peyton Pritchard's ascension this season to be the most interesting storyline, just because he's somebody that's been around the team, that he's not like he's 23 or 24. I think he's 27. So he's past the age where like a breakthrough would normally happen. And even so, I think he's been so good this season, and everybody likes to root for somebody that is not just naturally like the biggest, strongest player. That being said, I do think he's athletically gifted. Sometimes that gets lost. Like he's not just like a normal person. The way that he moves, like his speed, his footwork, like there are some gifts there. But I think it's a feel good kind of underdog story, and it's been a really fun one to watch. And then honestly, like maybe this is too niche, but I really like watching Maine and watching some of the prospects there. So if you're somebody that's like, I need like a new thing to get into, you can watch Maine games and you can see like Drew Peterson, Baylor Shireman, guys that right now are not really contributing a lot to Boston, but I guarantee you in 2 years will be a part of the rotation. And so you can get ahead of the curve. So then when the next Sam Hauser is on the team, like you'll actually know a little bit about that player. So that's again, this is like not a very X's and O's podcast, but wanted to just get through some of these. Yes, and I agree with that. How could you be a fan of the team? Okay, gonna just briefly, I do think Porzingis is gonna be back for the tough stretch. I see some more Porzingis questions. So we'll see. And I'm seeing now that there is some debate between Giannis and Tatum. Okay. So many good questions here. I'm just scrolling through here. Okay, Jeremy has a question here. Do you know if Coach Mazzulla has addressed Tatum's occasional tendency to hunt for Harden-esque fouls after pump faking a jumper? It surprises me that he hunts for fouls like this lately. So one thing that I'll say is that Mazzulla is quite literally never going to criticize the players to the media. It is something that he has been incredibly intentional and transparent about. It's not going to happen. I think it was a frustration for fans last year at points because people wanted to see, like, you know, I'm frustrated that Celtics just lost a bad game. Like, I want to see the coach get riled up. And they didn't see that, right? They saw a coach that was very cool and calm and short and brief and always kind of talking positively and taking ownership of things went wrong. So is he behind the scenes addressing it? I'm almost certain that he is. I think it's exactly the kind of thing that would frustrate him, though, that occasional like foul hunting thing. I know he's comfortable with players arguing with the refs, and he's actually been really kind of intentional about how he manipulates the refs, and he talks about this all the time, about how he doesn't think arguing with the refs is bad. It's just a question of like picking your spots, picking your strategy, and doing so in an intentional way. So Tatum's arguing with the refs, I don't think bothers him, but I wouldn't be surprised if like the foul hunting, when it's harmful and when it leads to a bad transition defense afterwards, like that is really detrimental. He's all about making sure that what you do on offense is not hurting your defense effectively. And like missed layups are so bad for that reason, or getting blocked at the rim. Those things are bad. So, yeah, but again, he'll never say that to the media because he thinks of it as like a weakness. And I think I like it. If I was a player, I would be like, why am I on Twitter like reading my coach like ripping me? But I know some coaches do it. Ime does it. So I think it was a little bit of a transition for Celtics fans. Mike Malone is the one that I always point to because I'm astounded when I watch his post-game presser sometimes, like how hard she is on the team. So again, it's just everybody has their own philosophy, and that's his. And thank you, Kian. I was getting paid a little. Let me just clarify that. I said earlier that I wasn't getting paid last year. I was getting paid a very little amount. My point is that like being able to do this full time has really been like a second level of the dream come true. Just being in the room is a dream come true in its own right. But yeah, so I guess they recognize that, and I got a job, so that's been great. Okay, I'm continuing to scroll through here. I'm actually going to switch over to Reddit to answer some of these questions because I did post these and they got a lot of engagement. So I'm glad to have locked into a new sphere here. What's your take on Tatum's recent 3-point slump? He started off the year scorching from 3, but it's down to 36%. Was hoping for a 38 to 40% from him this year after he tweaked his jump shot. So I think this connects back to what I said earlier about looking at a guy's full body of work when deciding what to kind of make of a certain shooting slump. So if you look at Tatum's career, for his career, he shot 37% from 3. This season, he's at 36%. That kind of answers my question, right? So he's going to be around in his career. I don't think that he's going to dramatically improve as a 3-point shooter at any point because he just takes really tough shots. He takes contested shots. Sometimes he's falling. Sometimes he's fading. He's very rarely open. And so that's the reality of it. He has been in a bad stretch of late. For his last 2 games that he's played, he's a combined 3 of 19. So that certainly hurt his numbers. I would imagine that he's going to finish his career. He's going to finish the season at around 37, 38%, which is right around his career averages. So that's the key for him, is to just be at that average point. He doesn't need to be shooting lights out to be a highly impactful player. That being said, I've said this many times, if he can have a season where he's shooting 41% from 3, like suddenly he's probably going to win MVP that year. So that's what's kind of holding him back, is just that extra couple points in efficiency, because I think that's when you're comparing the guys straight across, like he's always a little bit less efficient. But I'm trying to get better at just using the true shooting and effective field goal percentage, because really a field goal percentage is kind of antiquated because of the 3-point shooting being such a big part of things. But yeah, I'm not concerned about his shooting, but I also don't have any unrealistic expectations around where he's going to be this season, because ultimately like he's going to get to a point where he's going to have hot and cold nights, and this team is structured to be able to withstand that as well. Okay. So I got some questions here about Tillman on Reddit as well, but I think I talked a little bit about that. And then someone asked, this is a funny question, who has the most NBA potential between Deuce, Little Al, Hendricks? So a bunch of guys have kids on the team. I actually wrote a story about this. I don't want to like plug all my stories, but this is one of my favorite stories that I've written. So I'm going to put a link to this as well, just for people that are interested. This is about just how the Celtics as a family have encouraged like having their kids around and everything. And it's been a fun part of covering this team is just like seeing all the kids. I've heard that Al Horford's son, Ian, is like really good at basketball, but I'm not going to weigh in on the religion. I'm not going to seriously weigh in on the prospects of guys, kids who are like 8 years old becoming NBA players. But I've heard that Al's son is really good at basketball. And Al said, like, if he ends up deciding he wants to do this and playing, like he can see himself being like how his dad is now, Tito, who's also a former professional player. You can see him kind of supporting his son. So I'm sure a lot of their kids are going to dabble in basketball. It's like natural when your dad's an NBA player. And they're just so young. So it's hard to actually know like who's actually good and like who's just like the running up shots. Deuce is like pretty young. He's 7 and he can shoot like from pretty far out. So he has some natural ability there as well. But yeah, I don't actually know. I'm going to continue to go through some of these, but first, a quick message from our friends over at Game Time.
There's nothing I love more than going to watch Celtics games, NBA games, and just going to events in general, and I always use Game Time for all of my ticketing needs. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So right now I'm looking for the Game Time app. I see that there is a Christmas Day game against the 76ers, and I can click on that and I can actually see not just what the seat options are, but what the view of the court will be, because Game Time offers seat views, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. There's also a lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and there is all-in pricing, so you can actually see the total upfront price, no surprise fees at checkout. So I'm looking right now. Usually my holiday gifts are tickets to different sporting events that I know my friends and family will be interested in. And I always use Game Time for all of those purchases. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
Awesome. So I'm just scrolling through here and I'm seeing there are quite a bit of other Reddit questions that I have not gotten to, so I'll try to rapid fire some of these. Someone here asked, now that you've been on the job for a while, sorry, I'm so bad at reading from text out loud. It's like since I was a kid, I was like that. But now that you have been on the job for what feels like a while now, what were some things that you never would have been prepared for? So the biggest thing that has been interesting to me, and this might sound kind of not intuitive for fans, is that it's actually hard to come up with good questions. And I'm a very naturally curious person. Anybody that knows me in real life knows that I'm always asking people questions about like their lives, their upbringings. Like pregame, we have dinner, like all the reporters, and I usually ask like some like question for the room to discuss, like about their own lives or preferences or whatever. But with the media, you have to be mindful of so many different things when you're asking questions. You have to be thinking about, is this something that's going to upset the player? Is this the right time to ask it after a loss? Or is it before game? Is it the right time? At practice, is this the day to ask? Is it another day? They have a million cameras in their faces, a million people. You want to frame things right. And then you also don't want to ask the same stuff all the time, but you don't want to go too far. Like if right after a game, they handed me the mic and I was like, what's your favorite childhood memory? They would be like, literally, what's wrong with you? So that's actually been really hard is balancing, like figuring out when the right questions are acceptable and when they're not. And a lot of times I know that like I receive the YouTube comments on like regular pressers and everybody's like, oh, these reporters like ask the worst questions. And I don't disagree. Like sometimes I'm like, okay, this was we did not really ask any great questions here. No wonder it was kind of boring. But it's actually harder to come up with like suitable questions considering your own professional relationship and the timing and everything than you might expect, because it's not always like appropriate to ask the thing you exactly want to ask and figuring out how to phrase it and everything. So that's the one thing that surprised me. I thought it was going to be really easy to just like raise your hand and be like, oh, by the way, this, but it's really not. That being said, I always say if people have questions they want asked, you can always message me on Twitter. I'm not going to just like mindlessly ask anything, but I've asked several questions because fans messaged me them and I was like, that's actually really interesting. So I'm happy to be that conduit between the fans and the players if the question makes sense to ask. So anyways, yeah, just that's one more Reddit question. And then Jay here asked, what game are you looking forward to watching next? I'm just really excited for them to go out west because everybody knows the East is not as strong as the West this year. It hasn't been for quite some time. But that being said, like, I think it's not their Celtics' fault. Like, I think sometimes they get knocked for, like, they've had an easy schedule or, like, they had an easy path to the championship. It's like you can only play who you can play. But some really fun games are coming. So I'm hitting kind of the road in early January. I'll be at Houston. I'll be at Denver. I'm really excited for both those games. Denver, I know they're not as good this year, but seeing the matchup against a team that I think gave them quite a bit of trouble last year will be telling. And then the Thunder is probably number one for me. So I've never been to Oklahoma City. I'm excited to be there, but I think that team has just been so impressive so far this year. They've been, to me, the biggest challenger to Boston are the Thunder right now. The only thing that's kind of pushing me back is they just haven't been there before. They're still really young. They weren't in the conference finals. A lot of their players haven't really been in these moments before, but they've gotten so much better than last season. I loved their offseason. I really, really did. And so seeing them on the road versus Oklahoma City against the number one team in the West, like, that'll be, I think, a very interesting watch. And especially because Oklahoma City's defense has been historically dominant so far this season. And so watching the Celtics play against a really good defense is always just good to see how they can kind of play through periods of stagnation. Sometimes it's just, like, I thought the same thing about the Wolves last year, and they don't have the same level of defense, but it was just a good test for you. So that has been kind of the game that I've been eyeing. I always love seeing them go up against Golden State. Golden State's been up and down this year, but that whole West Coast trip, if you look in January, like, all the games that they're playing, I'm going to be at everything. And yeah, I think that'll be a very exciting stretch of time. And I think we'll come back from January having a little bit more of an understanding of, like, what this team is, if they're as good as they were last year, what their weaknesses are, and all that. So we'll see. And then Sean here asks, do you have a favorite game from the Celtics since you started covering them? I think I would say game 3 of the NBA Finals in Dallas, because things were going so well, and then they almost blew it, and then Jalen hits that clutch shot. There was just a lot of big moments down the stretch of that game. And it was after that game, it's like you knew they won the championship. And I hate to say that, but nobody's ever come back from 3-0 in any series. I had no reason to think that they were going to blow a 3-0 lead. And I think after that game, you just knew they won. And it was kind of unreal. It's like I was in Dallas and I was like, how is this possible? That, like, this team is about to, like, sweep the Mavericks. And obviously they didn't sweep them, but it was a really fun game to watch. Obviously the championship game was really fun. And then occasionally you just get a really good regular season game, and it's not always, like, the most intuitive, like, why that is. It's a confluence of factors. But there have been some really fun games this season as well. Sometimes I, like, love watching, like, when the bench guys get run, and watching, like, some of the stay ready guys play in the fourth quarter. So I'm watching sometimes for different things than just, like, game winners. But certainly it's always more fun when there are stars in the building. Like, that's the number one indicator. I think the Celtics players get up for those games more. We saw that with Milwaukee a couple weeks ago when Giannis and Dame were in Boston. There's a level of energy that's just different when there are stars in the building versus when they're not. Even if there's good teams, like, just the stars bring a different energy to it. So those games have been quite a bit of fun as well. I got a question here on Reddit. What are the negatives of covering the Celtics? There really aren't any negatives of covering the Celtics. I think just that there are a lot of reporters, like a ton. So it's hard to kind of get original content or original reporting. Like, if you're covering a team that has, like, 3 or 4 reporters, you can kind of just go to practice and get your own exclusive stuff and put it out there. But I think with the Celtics, because there's so many of us, you have to think about, like, picking your spots and, when are you going to try to get a player one-on-one? It's really hard to do so. So just, I think, how saturated the media market is, but it hasn't stopped me. It's just been, I'm just aware of the fact that it'd probably be easier covering a different franchise from that standpoint, but also, like, there's such a big fan base that there's a huge audience for everything. And then just the negative of just covering sports in general is just how you're subjecting yourself to, like, so much online hate and criticism. And I didn't really get that beforehand, so I didn't really know to expect that. But that's not really from Celtics fans. Celtics fans have been really nice to me. I know they get a bad rep, but I haven't had anything. So I'm sure part of it is because I covered the Celtics, but yeah, that has been a negative as well. Okay, I'm going to actually wrap it up unless there's, like, any, like, burning questions. I'm realizing that we're at about 50 minutes. There's another, like, 30 questions on Reddit that I did not get to. But I will do that for another show probably later this week. So maybe I'll do Wednesday. I'll do another one of these live streams. Thursday, Celtics are back at the Garden where they'll take on the Bulls. Tomorrow we'll have practice, so follow along. We'll have some coverage from practice. So we have practice tomorrow, Tuesday. Wednesday, Celtics are off, so I will go live here for another Q&A while I get through the rest of these questions. If you have questions you want answered, but you don't know if you'll be on live, you can also just message them to me on Twitter. And then I will be going to Chicago this weekend to cover Celtics in Chicago. So follow along for some updates on the ground there as well. And please do subscribe if you're not. If you're just watching this on CLNS Media, you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is You Got Boston Podcast. Like, comment, subscribe, all those things really help. And as always, really, really appreciate all of you for tuning in. I think there probably are some new people that are here as well today. So hopefully you enjoyed getting to get your questions answered. And sorry I didn't get through everything. Hopefully this was interesting enough. And thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Monday night. Enjoy the NBA Cup tomorrow. I'm going to sit down and lock into the NBA Cup. I do want to actually try to buy into it. And I think there's a really good matchup, Bucks Thunder. So enjoy that. And we'll be back post-game with the Garden Report on Thursday. Thanks, everyone.